Worldwide Pants proudly presents
Late Night with David Letterman.
Worldwide Pants, the most trusted name in pants and entertainment and pants.
All right, Fred's here. Fred, this is the first time that we're meeting.
Mike,
I've shot a separate
I want to
intro.
interrupt.
Yes, sir. Yes,
and
sir.
begin right away. I really applaud your courage at ripping the lid off the steaming cesspool that was Late Night with David Letterman. It takes a lot of courage to dig in and find out what the truth was. So let's talk now. Let's get it out, and let's let the healing begin.
You can look up answers to the surface questions. I mean, we talked a bit about,
Yes.
about what the show's all about, and it's like, well, look, Conan wrote a great piece, Bill Simmons wrote a great piece.
Yep.
Go read those. And all that. So I'm very happy for. I'm sure it's clear just for the opportunity to mention some of the more unsung people to share things that went on behind the cameras and what it was actually like. Not everyone is interested in this stuff, but to the people who are, it's like being a Beatles fan. No detail is too small.
The Tomorrow Show, you were a part of that.
It's why Letterman hired me. Honestly, I mean, I was offered in 1980. Letterman got his morning show.
Yeah.
I was working on the Tomorrow Show. And we never looked at Letterman as a threat, particularly because, we thought, all right, he'd do okay in the morning. Who knew? Actually, we didn't think that, but he could have. But we never thought that he would be taking over our time slot.
Right.
So Jack Rollins, who was the legendary manager and was Letterman's manager and executive producer with Letterman of all the shows.
Yeah.
He was with Woody Allen for all of Woody's movies.
Yeah.
Jack was a legend. He managed Harry Belafonte. He discovered Nichols and May. He was quite the guy.
Yeah.
By the time we worked with him, he was in his, I'd say, 70s to late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
So he kind of lost a little of the zip, but he was a wise, great guy to have on your side.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what was the point of the story? Where was I?
Well, you're late with the morning show, but then also
yeah. So
Yeah.
I had an office at NBC, and Stu Smiley, who was my college roommate and best friend, also worked for Rollins and was the point person for Letterman as his manager. And he was my college roommate. Yeah. So they used to come up to my office to watch the closed circuit feed of the rehearsals.
Yeah.
And I would say, oh, they're doing this all wrong. Oh, are they doing this wrong? And this is when Bob Stewart was the producer, who was the producer of The Pyramid. He was a game show guy who Letterman trusted because Letterman felt comfortable with him when he always did The Pyramid as a guest. So I would say, oh, this is, talk show 101. They're doing the wrong thing. They're just they got to do it this way. They got to do it that way. And Jack would always agree with me. So when they got rid of Bob Stewart early in the run, they offered me the producer's job of the morning show.
Right.
And I had a meeting with Brandon Tartikoff, or was it Silverman? I don't even remember who it was. And Nancy Geller was in late night programming, or daytime programming. And they offered me the job to produce it. At the time, I was dating a woman who was a talent booker on the show. And when I mentioned it to her, she flipped out. She said, I can't work for you, blah, 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 blah. And then I told Snyder I was offered the job. He goes, you're going to become the next producer of this show. You don't have to take that job. So I passed on a job, and they gave it to Barry Sand.
Wow.
Yeah.
That doesn't that narrative doesn't come out there enough either.
No, nobody knows that. That's a different time.
That's really interesting.
So then when he started the late night show, Letterman called me. Yeah. I was working at Good Morning America at the time as a writer and an associate producer. And he called me and he said, I can't offer you the job to run the show anymore because Barry Sand is with us. But, you could be the number 2 and produce segments and all that. So I said, yeah, sure. and then 14 years later. So
one thing comes to mind of what I must take credit for. When they were on in the morning, I wasn't on the morning show with Dave Letterman, as he used to like to refer to. I couldn't get up that early, but
Couldn't get up that early. Yep.
however, they had a beautiful theme written by Michael McDonald.
Yep.
And he made a recording of it, I think. I don't think he sang any lyrics, but he was just kind of humming along with that gorgeous voice of his. And they used to play that at the beginning and then segue into live band when Dave would come out. And hopefully you don't hear I don't think you did. You hear the transition.
Yeah.
But they kind of assumed I would do the same thing. You'll record your theme, of course, and we'll play it. And then, segue to live when Dave. And I said, it doesn't make sense. I said, it just came off Saturday Night Live. The whole thing was, the band playing it live, getting the audience reaction live. So I talked them into letting me do it that way. And of course it was, it set us up there.
There's a wonderful guy named Hal Gurney, who was the director of Late Night and the first few years of Late Show.
I had a phone conversation with him 3 days ago.
Oh, he's then he's the best. He's another delightful person.
Absolutely.
But so he was also the director when Dave had his morning show before Late Night, and he was telling me once that like in one of the first shows they did, there was a musician. I want to say Judy Collins, could be wrong, but Judy Collins. She came on and she was singing, and she starts to sing, and the mic isn't working, and so she sings her first line and nothing's coming out, and Dave's kind of looking around and Judy's looking around, and Hal just got on the PA and went, Judy, hold on for a sec. Your mic's not working. Just give us a second. We'll get it right. And, okay, Judy, you can start singing. And then she does her song. And Hal said after the show, Dave rushed back to him and was not mad, but just the opposite. Was like, that's what I want the show to be. Like, it felt real. And again, it's stripping away that artifice of TV and showing you what's going on behind the scene. Not everything's perfect,
Yes.
We were showing warts and all of what it is to do a TV show.
Like at 12:30, it was just this weird, odd thing. You felt like
different energy that hour.
Absolutely. I think Dave used to joke that it was only watched by prisoners and shut-ins. But, it did feel like you were just stumbled upon this kind of public access show that no one else knew about.
Yep.
The studio was sort of purposely, not very ornate. I used to love when he came through, when he was introduced and he came through, you saw the exit sign. It just looked like they put a desk and some audience chairs just in the middle of this abandoned office building.
Almost industrial like. Yeah,
absolutely.
With
so
those double doors, the industrial double doors. Absolutely.
And also, it very much spoke to me comedically. Not that I knew what irony was or this and that. It was just so different from Carson, and as a young guy, that really appealed to me. So I was hooked very, very young, and that just kept growing as I got older.
There was no internet. There was no show like this show. Maybe Saturday Night Live, obviously in the 70s and the 80s, did have that kind of secret club. There was something dangerous and weird happening late at night. Aside from that, the TV landscape in the 1980s was very, there was a lot of artifice. There was a lot of phoniness.
Yep.
There was a lot of just sort of homogenized, ridiculous, prepackaged, plastic-feeling television.
Yep.
So the feeling at 12:30 at night to turn on NBC and see this secret, weird TV clubhouse that was the late night show, and just see this bizarre deconstruction of a talk show. It was it was commenting on itself in real time. It had this self-analytical postmodern detachment. It was talking about being a show while also being a show. It was very writer forward, that show.
Yes.
It made you know that jokes were written. Dave would comment about the material. If he didn't like something, he would make a joke about the written material, but he would also bring out writers, bring out Chris Elliott, bring out Jerry Mulligan. Writers would come out and be in bits, and the idea that this show was written by people. I mean, that's why this book exists that I was just blabbering on about. Late Night with Dave Letterman, the book, is a tribute to the written material of that show. It's not a Dave fan book. It is a writer's fan book.
Yep.
And that was unique about that show. It was very writer-centric, writer-forward. Dave himself is such a good writer. If you look at Dave's stand-up before the show and his involvement with the writing through the show, he's a wordsmith. He is brilliant with a turn of phrase. He cares about the specificity of word choice. He's always been a writer. He's a writer. He has a writer brain. And you always felt that on his show, including during that writer's strike. And I remember having this feeling of solidarity towards TV writers at age 13 because Dave was talking about it. How would I have ever known anything about that at 13 years old, but for Dave talking about that? So I think that just indicates Dave's reverence for writers.
The pencil that went through the window in behind Dave and had a glass crashing effect. That's you. That was you, right?
It was, it was a viewer mail joke that came along pretty early. It wasn't, honest to God, it was not one of my better jokes that I'm most proud of as a joke. But basically, somebody wrote a question and said, "Is the glass in your window real?" And in the windows on on your set. And the joke I wrote is originally I had wanted him to sort of, just so early we didn't know how the letters were going to be handled.
Right.
So I wanted to crumple up the letter and throw it to the window, which seemed like more of a joke than just him throwing something at the window.
Right.
But it didn't work like that. So he threw the pencil in the window and it got a mild response from the audience. Not a huge, pretty much what I would have expected. But he did it like 3 more times that night, 4 more times the next night, and for the next 30 years. So when people say that's one of my bigger contributions, it's like, I wrote funnier stuff, I mean, it's like, it's just, you just never know what's going to catch. But he enjoyed doing. Carl Tiedemann and I discovered Calvert. We had made a short film at NYU. Carl was at NYU. I had graduated UW Madison at that point, and he was still there. And we had written a short film called King of the Z's, which is a parody documentary. I hate the term mockumentary. Parody documentary about the world's cheapest movie studio of the 40s and 50s. And what we did was we made, all the new interview footage we made in color, and we also created all the black and white bad movies that they made.
Yeah.
Calvert had actually auditioned for a film that we made a little earlier that with Carl, which also featured Carl as a performer. And there wasn't really a part for him in that, but I remember Carl and I basically looking at this guy and saying we could use him forever. So the original idea for King of the Disease was mine. And I remember thinking, well, what kind of actors would you have had at the studio that cheap? And Calvert came to mind immediately.
Sure.
So he was in my mind from day one with this. When we made the film, he's in every single clip from the movies from Vespucci. We also eventually, I'm skipping over the story, but eventually we would go on the show pretending to be historical experts on Letterman and run clips from the Vespucci films. That Vespucci being the name of the studio.
Yep.
So we made the film. The film had a certain amount of success. It played at Sundance, not Sundance, Telluride. Sorry, I don't want to blame Sundance for this. It played at Telluride, and it had a certain amount of success at Telluride. It got an agent. We got an agent for the film. It went on to Showtime, which in those days was only on the west side of New York. So I never saw it. I live on the east side. We had HBO. Wow. You couldn't get both HBO. You couldn't get both HBO and Showtime in those days. So I heard it was on, and they picked it up for a second year. It ran for 2 years, and then a man named Stu Smiley, who worked for the Ross and Jaffe office, saw the picture and reached out to us. And he didn't know particularly what he wanted to do with us, what we wanted to do. He just thought the film was funny, and he says, "Is there anything?" He said in conversations, "Is there anything really interesting? Well, that might be interesting to you, connected with that you want to do." And well, Rollins and Jaffe represented David Letterman. David had done the morning show. I had become a huge fan of the morning show. It was literally about 4 months or 3 months before the nighttime show was about to go on. And I said, "I don't know if this is possible. Do you think there's a possibility of having our material seen by David Letterman?" And he said, "Well, let me see." So he got the film to David and Meryl Marco, and we interviewed with them. I gave what I can guarantee was the worst single interview in the history of all time. And I know that for a fact because sometime later after we got the job, Meryl told me it was the worst interview anybody ever gave. But they thought my partner Carl was okay, so they decided to take a chance on us anyway.
Right.
For which I'm grateful. Nevertheless, they did give us a chance, and they said during that first meeting, we're looking for a little guy like the guy in your movie for our show, and I said, well, you're looking for him. That's the guy you're looking for. So the very first thing on the very first show, which was Meryl's idea, which was to use the opening from the movie Frankenstein, the original movie Frankenstein, opened with a warning to audiences that to be prepared for something different. And she just thought that'd be a great thing to start off the show, because in the best fashion of the show at its best, nobody understood what it was about. So, it just was sort of there, and Calvin was sort of there. And over time, Meryl gave him the name Larry Bud Melman, and that stuck. And over the course of time, he became what he became. And I always remember many, many years later, not many years later, but when he passed away, the year he passed away, I remember watching the Emmy Awards. And they did the in memoriams, and I can't remember who else was in that, but I do remember Tom Snyder was in it that year, I think, and some other really legendary names. And then here comes Calvert up on the thing, and I turned to my wife and I said, I've led a very unusual life.
To go to a reading and have those voiceover artists saying your lines, I mean, it's like the first time Letterman did one of my monologue jokes. It was several days before I started working on the show, because I was from the square old world where you had to give 2 weeks notice before you left your job. So Letterman did some monologue jokes. I had included a couple pages of monologue jokes in my package, and he did some. And that feeling of hearing what you wrote being said by someone that you thought the world of, that was something that that I hope everyone who aspires to do it gets that pleasure, because it is as gratifying and satisfying and thrilling as anything I can imagine. Well, almost anything.
There you go.
Probably the NBC tape library, though, because that was the job, which actually made a difference in I don't know if it made a difference, but it did figure in the day that I was hired, because the tape library was in 30 Rock, where 1410 West, the Letterman offices were. And I came back from some dreary recap of some prime time, Harper Valley PTA show or something. Sure. And there was just a Post-it note. If you remember Post-it notes, they were these sticky.
Yes.
That just said, Meryl Marco phoned, can you come over to her office? She wants to talk with you. And I just ran from the 24th floor down to the 14th floor and presented myself to Meryl. And she seemed quite astonished, and then said, Don, which was one of the pet names or code names or nicknames for Letterman. He came into the office and said, how did you get over here so fast? And I said, I work in the building. And I got the note that Meryl wanted to see me, and I decided to eschew the return phone call and just come directly. And of course, Letterman said, eschew. Did you hear that, Meryl? We got a real writer here. We're going to get our money's worth. And then I went back to my office, but I wasn't sure I got the job. I never said, we'll see you next week, but I did get a call the next day from some NBC lawyer who said, you'll get $1,000 a week. And at that point I felt like, holy, that would it was like, you are going to live in a castle made out of ice cream, and you will ride in a car shaped like a swan. And, no, it was quite fantastic. But that was again just the dizzying secondaries. Yes. The main thing was how wonderful that they liked my submission and my drawings enough to hire me. That part was wonderful. And then there was the terror of, now I must do this every day, and they're going to find out what a fraud I am. But it actually took them 10 or 12 years to find out what a fraud I was. So luckily, I had enough momentum going there to get along.
Class of '82 at Harvard, got on the Lampoon, and I just loved it. It was all I cared about at Harvard. I got on, and other guys in the staff was Tom Gamble, who I thought was Letterman writer, of course, et cetera, who I just thought was the funniest guy I ever met. unless it was Andy Borowitz over there, who writes for the New Yorker, or maybe it was Mike Reese, who was in my dorm. All these guys are good friends to this day, which is probably the main thing, just to get a bunch of lifelong friends. But it was a gang of people who were just very committed, for good or ill, to exploring a comedic premise, just all the way to the end, and just laughing was very important to them. And I didn't love it in any pre-professional way. It was just I was just very happy to hang out there and laugh and try to make them laugh. And Conan got on.
That would have been your last year of Harvard. Conan shows up.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right. And also my last year of Harvard, the Letterman show goes on. Saturday Night Live, I think, was very much this is satirical about early TV, and just the sense of, this is more made by people closer to my age. You could just sort of sense it. And Jim Downey was such the trailblazer in terms of you could make a living doing this. Guys like Howard Stern and Jerry Seinfeld have talked about how important Mad Magazine was to them.
Yes.
That adults can be silly.
Yes.
You don't necessarily have to grow up. Downey working at Saturday Night Live, and then my second semester, senior year, Letterman came on, and right away, like so many people roughly my age, it was like, yep, this is another one. We've been waiting for this, and we can talk about what it was about the show. But then Tom Gamble and Max Pross get hired on it. Guys who I'd met and only known but bonded with. I didn't go to Harvard with any plan, and I did not know the Lampoon existed.
Wow.
Yeah. Went to a comp meeting, and right away, like as I've said, fell in love with it and didn't care about anything else. Many projects are snake bit. I think that's how Jim Downey described the new show.
Yep.
Which will always be my favorite show, because it siphoned off many of the original Letterman writers and opened up those precious slots, and I was lucky enough to get one.
I was a writer, obviously, for about a year before I was head writer, and even then, the head writer promotion, I think, was out of desperation, because most of the staff at that point left to go to either Saturday Night Live or to another Lord Michael show. You know all about this.
Sure.
So there was a little bit of like, we'll promote the corporal to be lead the group.
It was Steve who brought you in. Do you remember anything about the interview with Steve?
Well, I knew Steve just a little. Well, from being on the Lampoon, I was on those guys' radar as maybe somebody with potential. And Downey had told me that he wanted me, at a certain point. But it was just, so I sent in a packet, and just got the call out of the blue from Steve. We really liked your latest packet. Can you come in and talk? And just the that was the greatest break I ever got.
Oh, by the way, did you play softball at Harvard?
Softball? No, I played baseball in I played baseball in high school.
Okay, because I was also told on the Letterman softball team, you were a ringer, level quality player.
I played baseball in high school, and when I moved to New York City after graduation, I got a job at the baseball desk at the Associated Press. I was a clerk, which was across the street from it was in Rockefeller Plaza, across the street from 30 Rock. And when Steve O'Donnell gave me the call, and I went in, and at a certain point, Dave came in, I think just to make sure he could tolerate me. And I was telling him,
Sure.
I work at the baseball desk, and but if I get this job, I'll quit. And Dave said, well, hope we can expect the same loyalty. Dave was a baseball fan. I knew a lot. And so, if people say, what was your relationship like with Dave? Very cordial. And in all honesty, we talked a lot about baseball.
That's awesome. Is he a Reds fan?
He was, yeah. And I remember one time so when you were growing up, I guess like Joey J was on the pitching staff. Yeah, that kind of thing was got some cred with him. Well, it was good. I got through a very enjoyable baseball season, 1983, and football season was starting up, and it would have become quickly clear to the guys at the Associated Press that I knew very little about football. Much more.
You can only fudge your way through so much.
Yeah, exactly. So the Letterman offer came along. It was very well timed. It would have been welcome at any time, but one more reason. So my first day on the job was Halloween of 1983.
We were doing this show, and so a lot of that was the organization of just having either Steve or Gerard was the head writer for a little bit, or Merrill was the head writer. We had a board, and the board had 2 weeks worth of cards on it, and we knew those cards needed to be filled. And the way those cards worked, even the pace of coming to work. We came to work, people who were writing monologue jokes got there early, maybe 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and maybe they've already started at home. I know for a while I was writing monologue jokes, and so I would start at home and then come in around 8:30.
Tough to get a joke on the air at that point, because at that point it's opening remarks, and there's what, three? Maybe three?
Yep. And everybody else showed up around 10. Right. And you stayed from like 10 to 7, 10 to 8 if you had something on that you needed to work on. So it was banker's hours, right? Right. There's those guys upstairs at SNL, on Tuesday and Wednesday night, they didn't go home.
Yeah.
Right. But Dave had this kind of like, look, we have to just keep doing this. We're running a marathon, not a sprint. And so there's that. And then there's the cards. Right, there's the board. We know there's like maybe there's a cold opening.
Yeah.
There's opening remarks. There's an Act 1 piece. There's a guest. There's an Act 5 piece. Maybe there's something at the end, and you got to fix. And originally there's 4 shows a night, right?
Yeah.
So a week, about 4 shows a night. Jesus. And so you just always kept your eye on it, and you knew. I think. I would say everyone on the writing staff, and this is kind of true on writing staffs, period, successful television writing staff, everybody was kind of a self-starter. So they were like, it wasn't tooth and nail competition, but there was competition.
Oh, for sure.
You wanted to make sure that you were earning your keep. Right.
Well, were you on the 13-week deal where your thing was every 13 weeks you were?
Yeah, and it's funny. After 13 weeks, actually, this is a better story. So after 13 weeks, I went to the executive producer, Barry Sand.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know. Nobody's told me anything. Actually, it was 10 weeks because they needed to give me a 3-week.
Just in case. Yeah.
And I said, well, we're okay. And he's like, never come back here. I'll find you. If it's not working, it won't be on a 10-week cycle, and I will find you.
Okay, that's
but
cool.
The best story about that is first week, I'm in there and we're writing, and my partner Kevin Curran, who we'll talk about in a second, and I came in with a stack of stuff, including the morning show, which was the show that we wrote that got nominated for an Emmy, right? So we came in with a stack of stuff. We were ready. And after the end of the first week, I walked into Merrill's office and I said, gee, am I doing okay? He says, all right. By the way,
how old are you at this point?
A question Kevin would never ask anybody.
Right.
He was like, but I said,
you're early 20s at this point, right?
Yeah. And so Merrill just goes, here's what you're doing fine. Here's what you need to know. I don't know if you've heard this story already. The name of this show is Dave's Attitude Problem. And every night people tune in to go, what the fuck is bugging Dave? What's bothering Dave?
Yeah.
And she goes, you're pretty good. You're pretty good at kind of like what bothers you bothers Dave.
We went out and let's see, Kevin Kern had gone out, was doing Married with Children, and I guess Gavin Pallone, the agent, well, I guess was his agent. He says, who else is there at Letterman that I might contact? He mentioned me. Kevin and I had written a lot of stuff together. He could just make leaps across time for, with crazy references. And he and I, in the last couple of seasons on the show of I Was at Letterman, we wrote quite a bit of stuff together, and we worked on some shows. We did Hardball together, for that matter. But I had an idea for maybe we'll do like the late night chess set, because there was a Civil War chess set, where Abe Lincoln is the king, and
oh my God, take my money! I'd buy that. I would buy that in a second.
Well, I wish I'd grabbed it because I was sort of thinking like late night chess set. With like Dave and Terry Garr and and all the people on the show. Again, it was navel gazing, but it seemed promising. And who would they oppose? And Kevin says, Hitler's Nazi Germany. So it was Kevin who would come in. It's like, okay, that's it. So the piece exists out there somewhere, and it was pretty funny, but he would make those links. And it was invaluable for things like top 10 lists. He would pitch things where it's just like, holy cow, where did you
come up with that?
Where did you come from that? So, and of course he and Sandy Frank, couple of dear friends, no longer with us that I'm awfully happy to remember. I think Paul Schaefer now I'm remembering it. He says at the start, he goes like, I'm Paul Schaefer. You know me as a lover of beauty. But I'm also a great judge of beauty. So that's an example of, I remember Paul kind of going like, you come up with that? And I go, yes, I did.
Again, right, this could go wrong.
Yeah.
Stupid pet tricks, it can go wrong.
Yep.
Right? And a lot of it, yeah. There was one, I want to talk for a second about my friend Kevin Curran.
Please.
So I met Kevin when we were both at the National Lampoon.
Yeah.
And we hit it off immediately. Kevin was just brilliant and unique and weird. And the great majority of writing teams have two people, one of whom is the workhorse and one of whom is the show pony. And I was the workhorse. I was the guy getting in at 10 in the morning. I'm going to type this out.
Yeah.
And Kevin would walk in, and this is what the show pony does, and just go, no, it's this.
Oh, wow.
And you go, fuck. So here's my favorite story about that. And it goes back to, hey, this might go wrong, but it's going to be genuine.
Yeah.
So there was a viewer mail question. And there was an era in viewer mail where it stopped being, how can I get tickets to the show? And got it into like, oh, I'm going to write a viewer mail that gets on the air.
Yeah.
And it was, and if I remember correctly, it was what do Burt Reynolds, Sally Fields, and I can't remember what the third person was, but it was somebody like, and I'm carbon dating this joke, Morgan Fairchild. What do Burt Reynolds, Morgan Fairchild, and Sally Field have in common? That was the viewer mail. And so I'm in there trying to come up with different alternatives. And Kevin goes, well, they all get their nutrition from a salt lick. So we hand it in, and Dave approves it, and they do a card with the three faces, and then you pull a plastic little overlay, and these cartoon tongues come out, and there's a salt lick. and so Dave does it, and there's just a stunned silence.
Awesome.
In the audience. They really don't know why this has been done. And Dave starts just cackling. And Paul's laughing. And this is so surreal. And then he just moves on to the next, and he's just like, okay, and we'll just move on to the next thing. And to me, that was Kevin. Just Kevin was capable of that in ways that were just amazing. and B, that was part of the thing. It's like, oh, let's, you have the Randy Cohen things with the 360-degree show or Monkey Cam. And it's like, yeah, this is a recipe for this just going wrong. That's why we're going to do it.
Yeah. When I became the producer of the show, Letterman said to me, called me into his office, and he goes, Morty, you could say no to this. He said, there are times when I'm out there and it's very lonely. He goes, I'll look over to Paul and he's writing some music, doing his job, and I need somebody to help me. If a joke fails and I'm out there, on my own, do you mind if I talk to you? Do you mind if I bring you into the proceedings? I said, hey, if it's going to make you more comfortable and it's going to help jokes, by all means. And that's when he started talking to me on the air.
Yeah.
But it was very considered. And he asked me if I minded, and I didn't care. I was a ham to begin with, so I liked it. So that's kind of how that started. And I think it was the same with Hal. I think he, over the years, it wasn't even years with an S. I mean, it came very quickly that he understood Hal's vision and understood that Hal shared his vision.
Yeah.
And gave him free rein, like you said, to do anything. I couldn't really enjoy it like the real fans enjoyed it. Every night I would go back into a dressing room and get the shit kicked out of me. Actually not. And I'll dispel a myth there.
Yep.
I used to be the guy, as I'm sure Rob Burnett was after me, and as I'm sure Barry Sand was before me.
Yep.
I used to have to knock on the door after a show. After a good show, it was always easier. After a shitty show, it was hellish. And I would be the first to knock on the door, go into Letterman's dressing room while he was undressing, taking his tie off, taking his shirt off. And he never, and we'd go up to the office and the staff would stand outside. He hated my jokes. He hated my guest. He hated the interview I did. He never did that. He was never the kind of guy that would place blame on anybody else. He was so self-critical.
Yeah.
That he just beat himself up. He wasn't ragging on anybody else. He wasn't, he would be yelling at times, but he was yelling about himself.
You're doing so many shows, you're doing 200 shows a year.
Yep.
Everyone it's like, we got to buckle down and work together because we're just trying to put on the best show we can, given the, limited amount of time we have to produce them,
Fantastic.
Or even just seeing Jerry Mulligan,
Yeah.
just being near Jerry, it was one of those things you're just like, oh, this is like, we would be in the room, the writer's room having a meeting, and sometimes Jerry would be going down to rehearsal because he was going to be on the show that night, and he would just walk in and he'd just yell like, I don't know, something about the movies, and then he'd walk out, and it would just, everyone would laugh, and it would just be, one of those moments you're just like, that's Jerry Mulligan, you know what I mean? And you're just, it was just so cool to sort of be around all these people all the time.
Let me see. I always wrote jokes. I wrote jokes and answers to viewer mail letters.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one of my favorite viewer mail letters, I forget, maybe it wasn't even that, but it was an intro. And Dave introduced me, and I came out in a Batman suit. And I started, and they said, so what's new, Jerry? I said, oh, well, we have a nice Labrador, black lab now in the family. And I had some pictures I took out and showed them the pictures of a black lab romping in the leaves out in the backyard.
And you're the Adam West Batman. That's who you were.
Yeah.
You were the Adam West Batman. It was fantastic. Yep.
I didn't have a plastic six pack like Clooney or whatever. And I just go rambling on about the dog and what he likes to eat and how the kids love him and he's great with the kids. And he goes, why are you dressed like Batman? He goes, oh, that, yeah. I was very upset when I found out about some of the casting of the new movie. They've got Jack Nicklaus as the Joker. Now, he's a great golfer, but it makes no sense. I mean, this is his first acting job, I think, isn't it? I mean, I'm surprised there hasn't been more backlash about that, And well, it's actually Jack Nicholson. Oh, okay, yeah, well, that makes a lot more sense because he's anyway. And here's a little footnote.
Issue resolved.
Little footnote, no problem. A little footnote, no pun intended. There had been something happening on stage right before that.
Yeah.
Where a lot of glass got smashed.
Yeah.
And I was wearing like a onesie with no shoes. And so I did that whole thing with bleeding feet.
And then Bruce Willis took it and made a hit movie out of it called Die Hard. And
I know.
You know, I didn't see your name in the credits there. Another robbery.
I got nothing. Let me see things I like. I remember. This was just an ad lib, sort of. I think it was Dynasty was on it. Maybe she was in some special, but Joan Collins was in the news, and Dave said something. It was her birthday.
Yep.
And she was probably turning 50, and so I said, Dave said, congratulations, happy birthday to Joan Collins, who today is now 70 years old. Okay, so anyway, her people. Give me the phone. Where's the phone? So anyway, in makeup, I was talking about it. I said, why don't you say this? He goes, okay. So he went out and said, by the way, I want to have an apology. Yesterday, I said that Joan Collins was 70 years old. Miss Collins, it turns out, is 70 years young. And it did not appease her people. Oh, there was something I wanted to mention when we were talking about the pre-interviewing people and stuff.
Yes, sir.
I'm trying to maintain this random nature of the broadcast. And
outstanding.
One time I got a call. Somebody said, Wilford Brimley would like to do the show. So you give him a call? So I gave him a call. And Mr. Brimley, yeah, okay, what do you want? I was wondering if you did the show, what would you like to talk about? He goes, how the hell do I know what I want to talk about at Tuesday next week, 5:30 p.m.? Do you know what the hell you want to talk about next Tuesday, 5:30 p.m.? And it's like, oh, okay. Well, so long. That was I hung up. It turns out he thought I was a logistics guy who was going to like book his airplane flight and book his hotel room, I guess. The pitches were very strange. Somebody once pitched the lead singer of Goodbye Stranger, Supertramp.
Yeah.
I said, well, okay, it would be a good as a guest, not as a musical guest. And I said, okay, well, what would he talk about? Oh, angles. We need angles. He goes, well, this is interesting. He lives in Los Angeles and he rides a bike.
Whoa, that gives us something.
That's two segments. Yeah, I know. Really.
Tell us about LA now. Tell us about the bike.
Yeah, the pitches you would get from people were just like, they would love this guy. They would love this guy, showing absolutely no idea of Dave's sensibility.
Yeah.
It's like the kind of jokes people would submit in the packet trying to get a job, like about Dolly Parton's chest and stuff like that.
Sure.
Sandy Frank was a lovely guy and just an extremely smart guy. Mm-hmm. Like gone to Harvard Law School, become a lawyer. Was decided this is no fun. So he joined the show. He wrote a lot of smart stuff, and a fun behind the scenes memory I have of him is somebody had gotten into the building, some young guy, and plastered our bathroom up on the 14th floor with his resume. You just sort of like, hey, he'd really love to come work for the show. It's some guy making an honest effort, to thinking I'll do something wacky, and it's a wacky show, and that'll get me out, and all that. Okay, no problem. You showed initiative, but. And on his resume at the bottom there, it says, special skills, where it says things like typing. And Sandy had handwritten in among this guy, poor guy's special skills, as badly miscalculating the sensibilities of prospective employers.
Yep.
So, thanks for the chance to remember another very dear, funny, smart guy.
My favorite one about like what's bothering Dave.
Yeah.
There are two of them. One, we show up and we had something all written and scripted, and the script was kind of like a decision tree. We'll go into that later. If this happens, say this, right?
This is the choose your own adventure portion, folks. Right there.
It is the choose your own adventure, and I had written 2 choose your own adventure books, so we're all good with that.
Delighted me about that. But yes, anyways, please continue.
So Dave couldn't go because he had a toothache. And I was able to find him a dentist. And we went to the dentist. So what's bothering Dave? His tooth is bothering him. He went to the dentist. The 3 jokes that I remember right off the top of my head, by the way, not scripted at all.
Yeah.
Dave was just like, let's get the camera and we'll go. And I'm like, okay. So first one, he's got a cigar in his mouth and puts it out in the sink, in the washing spit sink. Second, asks if he can put some rubber gloves on too. I remember that. And then there's Hal's shot. And Hal,
Master.
People haven't talked about the second funniest person on the staff is Hal. And he said, Dave, let's just get a cutaway. So here's your legs on the lounge, on the seat here with the dentist. If you could just raise them up and lower them a couple of times, which is just what everybody does when they're hurting, right? And we just kept cutting back. There's the sound of the drill. So that was great. There was that one, and then there was one where he had a really bad cold.
Yeah.
And we decided to go see an ear, nose, and throat guy.
Yeah.
And I had called a doctor that I knew, a friend of mine, who was a friend of mine at the time, a Dr. Lou Aroni, who, by the way, was on the team.
Dr. Lou. Oh my gosh.
Dr. Lou. So I was the one who introduced Dave to Dr. Lou, my wife and I. And so we go and there's an ear, nose, and throat guy who looks like he's walked out of, a production of Our Town.
Yeah.
And he's saying, well, let's just spray this thing up in here to see what's going on.
Yep.
And I've got, by the way, Schukei footage of like little people in a cave, right? And you probably know the phrase Schukei footage, right? So
absolutely.
So then Dave grabs the nozzle and he goes, "Whoo, let me just spray it around here." Unbeknownst to Dave, the solution is like 40% cocaine. It was just weird. And Lou told me like a week later. He said, "Geez, I didn't know how to tell you this." And I don't know if I even told Dave, "Oh, you were just spraying cocaine around the room."
I really enjoyed doing viewer mail because, when people said, "Oh, are those letters real?" And it's like, yeah, absolutely they are, and thank goodness, because you didn't, you weren't facing a blank page.
Yep.
You just read a letter and I remember there was a 60 Minutes where Leslie Stahl, I think, asked Jerry Seinfeld, "Where do you get the ideas for Seinfeld?" And Jerry said, "You think I know where ideas come from?" And I'm going to now tell that to the world. So of course there's ultimately something mysterious about it all. But yes, something like viewer mail, it was a great relief to read things and just every now and then something would spark. And of course, well, that's how Flunky the Clown came about. Was I think the letter was something like, "Dear Dave," or Flunky who actually reads these letters. I suppose it was Flunky. Yeah, maybe that's a clown name, and did it and played okay. And at the end of it, Dave said something like, "Well, thanks for bringing laughter into the world," and I just sort of ad-libbed, "Yeah, right." Without looking up, and that got a better laugh. And so, okay, we had a repeatable character that, it's nice to have something that devoted fans of the show do remember. And actually, when I went to The Simpsons and met Matt Groening, my first day of work there, after a minute or two, a light bulb went on, and he said, "Hey, you're Flunky." He just recognized the voice, and I got the same thing from Patton Oswalt one time. So there you go.
The idea that you two shared an office together, like right there, it's like, oh my gosh, how did that work? Like what was it? Was there a collaboration? Was it you two would be on your little corners writing something and then you'd share with each other, or
there
was big room? Like how did that work?
There was virtually no collaboration because I mostly did monologue stuff and Jeff did more sketch stuff. One thing we both enjoyed was music, and we would play music a lot. And there was one, you want to get really obscure, there was one song we used to play like 2 or 3 times in a row. And it was the Bodines. Have you heard of the Bodines? It's a band, it was very, very big with very few people. And there was one of their songs that we played, Bodeans. And there was a song of theirs called, I can't remember. It was the last one on one of their albums. But we used to play it over and over. We played the Edmund Fitzgerald sometimes too, just for the narrative.
I had written a cold opening that involved it. That's why we were listening to it.
Is that what it was? Yeah.
Yeah. But just real quickly, it was there was a guest who kept getting bumped, and there was a cold opening where Dave was talking to Paul, and he assured the guest he wouldn't be bumped this time. And then he's chatting with Paul, and Dave's in the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald comes up, and Dave said, I think I know all the lyrics to that. And he started saying them, and time crept by, and the guests looked worried, But no, we didn't collaborate much, as Jerry said. We'd show up and chat a little bit, and then Jerry would have to write monologue jokes. Right. So he would signal that he had to get to work by putting on headphones and listening to Counting Crows or the Bodines or whatever, and that it just always impressed me that Jerry and Larry Jacobson would both churn out a couple of dozen monologue jokes every day. That's
speaking of guests getting bumped. When I told this last time that I briefly had to work as a segment producer, halftime, and writing monologue the other half. And the first guest I ever had to bump was Jerry Seinfeld, which unimaginable these days, I know. And he was a little upset, obviously, and he just said, that would never happen. This would never happen on Carson. And he was on Carson the next week. And guess what happened? No, he didn't. He was fine. He went on. He was very funny. But anyway, the only guest.
Jeff was waiting for it.
the only
Jerry
guest,
used to get me. Okay, in the office between the two of us, Jerry's phone would ring, he'd answer it, and he'd say, "Oh, hi, sweetheart, it's Suzanne, who's my wife." And
by the way,
that every time.
The other thing that's interesting is that Dave always remembered pitches, even if they'd been rejected.
Oh, that's
so for the first couple of years I was there, I suggested, hey, why doesn't Dave rent a convertible and drive through a car wash?
Holy crap.
And so Dave turned it down. And then after the writer's strike, I remember he mentioned it to Steve, like, maybe we should do that now.
Yeah.
And I was shocked that he had remembered it. There is a fatal flaw in that remote. So here's the fatal flaw. We go to Avis. We rent a car. Dave drives the car to Queens. We go to a car wash. Dave stays inside the car with Carl, the cameraman, and goes through the car wash.
Yep.
Completely mic'd up and everything.
Yep.
Drives back to return the car. The car, by the way, there's 2 inches of water inside of the car.
Yeah.
The fatal flaw is that Dave is wearing dry clothes when he returns the car. And the reason that is that whatever fucking chemicals exist in car wash water were horribly uncomfortable for Dave. And he was just like, I got to get out of these clothes. I can't wear these. And we all rode back, and I said, come on, put him back on. No, it wasn't going to happen. I think he did develop a slight rash, over the weekend. I felt terrible. And the person I really felt terrible for was Carl. Carl was covered in plastic tarp with the camera, having to ride through the car wash.
This is going to also dovetail to your musical prowess as well.
Participate in quotes. There was one. I wrote this one with Joe Toplin, but it was Dave thinking, boy, what would life be like without TV? Gee, I wonder, and then we were dancing around him and singing this, song Joe and I wrote, just, life without TV, it wouldn't be nice. No Cagney and Lacey, no Miami Vice. And you know, and we're dancing around Dave, and he's, you know, ha ha ha, you know, his participation was to scream, and it was a night. And Paul wakes him up, and he goes like, "Oh my God, I dreamed I was hosting the Emmys." And it was a nightmare. But a little behind the scenes is, you know, like when I like music, I like musicals. I was in them in high school, and so when we were doing that bit in rehearsal, Dave said to me, or maybe it was when we did another one, Election Day, Dave Letterman's Election Day, you know, where I'm out there, you know, straw voter, Election Day, the day.
The punchline on that one was great too.
Right, and when we were doing those, I do remember Dave said to me, "You like this, don't you? You like singing, and you know, like he caught me. You like singing and dancing around." And I admitted, I guess I mind it less than the next guy. I admitted that. Now, here's the funny thing: is I would have a little bit of an occasional running gag with Dave. I'd pitch something that he wouldn't do in a million years, and I'd say, you know, I was thinking, Dave, maybe start the show with a song. You come out, and, you know, you go, feeling good, crowd looks great, magic's on its way. You know, I've written a song, magic is on its way, and Dave, nod, great. You know, let's see the charts. You know.
I've heard you talk about the flatulence thing.
Yeah, Malkoff and I are delighted to this day about that.
And I had dinner last night with Doug Herzog. Do you know Doug? I had dinner with Doug Herzog and Kevin Kay, who was our cue card guy.
No kidding.
And Lee Kernis, who's a manager, who's a good friend of mine. And we had dinner, and we were just telling stories like this, you know, about Wendell. And Kevin and I used to be in the pit where the camera was. Camera 2 would be back in this little carved out area of the audience. This is Studio 6A.
Yep.
And the pit would, you know, you had a big camera and a big cameraman. You had Wendell, me, Kevin with the cue cards, and usually the segment producer who had the segment that we were shooting.
Yeah.
And it was very tight quarters. You were right on top of people. And all of a sudden you'd hear, and you'd go, Bill, and it would stink. And you were literally 2.5 feet away from the audience. And the audience all heard it. The audience heard it all. And we'd crack up.
Yeah.
We'd laugh. Kevin Kay, who has like this cackle, like a girl's laugh. It was like, and we would just crack up. And Letterman would always look around the camera to the side and go, "Everything okay there? We are. Don't worry." No. And he'd go, "You sure everything's okay back there?" And it became a running joke. And we told Letterman what was going on, and it disgusted him. "Why do you do that in front of the audience? God, what are we going to do about this guy?" So another chit on Wendell's record, you know, it was. But Letterman just didn't, you know, Letterman was interesting because, and it wasn't about control. It was about, he just had such a brilliant mind that he wanted to know how to get into everything and how to get out of everything.
Right.
And that's all he cared about. You know, people would say, you know, we used to give him the interviews, and it would have the question and the answers, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he knew all the answers. So, and the reason he wanted to know the answers was he didn't want to step on their punchlines. You know, hopefully all the stories ended with something funny. They were good stories with a payoff, with a punchline. So he knew what the punchline was, but he knew to lay back at that time when they were delivering the punchline. He never stepped on a punchline. He never stepped on a joke because he knew what was about to happen. And he was great at reacting, and generally they delivered it in a funny way. So he was genuinely laughing, even though he knew what was coming.
Yeah.
But it wasn't about control. It was about, you know, respect for the guest and letting them come out with the punchline that they had prepared. You know, he knew what everything Andy Kaufman did on that show, he knew. And Andy Kaufman was smart enough to tell, because, you know, something, he knew that Letterman would time it perfectly and would lay back when he had to, and would not interrupt him when he wanted to have an argument and was screaming at Jerry Lawler.
Yeah.
You know, so it was all very carefully executed on Dave's part. He was great at it.
Can you talk about Andy and Jerry that night a little bit? Did you know?
No.
Good.
I did not know. And Jerry Mulligan, who was a segment producer, that he did not know.
Yeah.
We were all surprised, but Letterman and Merrill, I don't know, I don't think Merrill was there at the time, but Letterman and Merrill had the idea to put Andy on the show because they knew him. They knew him from the comedy clubs in LA.
Yeah.
And they trusted him. Andy had terrific comedic instincts. He was brilliant. And Letterman trusted him like he trusted nobody else. So he knew that Andy knew, once again, how to get into it, how to get out of it.
Yes.
Andy was brilliant at it. So Letterman gave him that full trust.
Yeah.
And Andy always pulled it off beautifully. But Andy would come in for a week and sit in my office and plot these bits.
Yes.
He would just work out every beat, and he would cast. He once came on and said he's adopting kids from the inner city, you know. So he came in and he did auditions. He had all these, you know, these African-American kids, these Puerto Rican kids, and he was doing auditions with them, and he was just brilliant. The big story with Andy that I have, and I became very good friends with him. I used to have breakfast with him and lunch with him. I mean, I knew his brother, I knew his sister, I knew his parents. I mean, I got very close with Andy, close enough that he comes up to my office one day, and I don't think he was booked on the show. And he just comes up and he goes, Morty, he goes, my father made me do a will. I said, oh, well, you're successful. You have money. You should have a will. He goes, I have to get 3 witnesses to me signing the will. So he asked me, he asked our talent booker, Sandra Furton, and Barry Sand was the producer of the show at the time. He asked the 3 of us to witness his signing of his will. And I, of course, said, Andy, let's do this on the show. I go, let's not do this now. And he wasn't sick. It was, you know, he was doing well. I said, how great would it be if it's Letterman and Biff and whoever else signing the will? He goes, oh, that's a great idea. Let me ask my father. He calls his father, and the father says, Andy, it's something very serious. I don't think you should make light of it and do it on the show. So Andy always listened to his father. He trusted his father, who was a very bright guy. He was an attorney, I think. So we did it in private. Cut to when Andy passed away, I get a call from the attorney, and we had to put the will into probate. So we knew that he had passed away and it wasn't a fake. You know, and I went to the funeral, and it was very sad. It was a funny day. I used to be friendly with Carol Kane. So Carol and I went to the funeral together, and it was in Westchester, and they gave crazy directions. We didn't know where the fuck we were going. And Carol and I are driving through the cemetery, and we were at the wrong cemetery. There were like a cluster of these cemeteries. Then we finally get to the right cemetery, and we get there late, and it was like a movie. Carol and I, and we were laughing, and it was like, Andy did this. Andy did this on purpose. You know, he was something. He was something else.
Because I want to talk about Calvert a little bit. I mean, Steve Weiner, again, writer, he's the guy, he and Carl discovered Calvert, and that, you know, so we're going to do a Calvert tribute episode at some point. It was the Pan American journey.
The Calvert to Forest Pan American Goodwill Tour.
Goodwill Tour. Yes. So, and you're actually on tour with Calvert.
The backstory was that I was a writer's assistant then. Steve came in to tell the writers, Dave loves this idea. Who wants to go? And all the writers were like, I'm married. I have kids. I have a family. This is an indeterminate trip. So no one volunteered. And after the meeting closed up, and I went to my office and went, wait a second, I'm not married. I can go. I can do this. So I volunteered, and Steve was like, oh yeah, that'd be great. So the problem with it was that no camera crew could go because that would be too expensive, because it would have to be a NABIT camera crew.
Okay.
And that would have been hugely expensive to pay their room rate and all that every night, and as much as their day rate and all that. So all we had was that Panasonic video phone that's interlaced scanned a black and white picture, very grainy.
Yeah.
And Dave even said on the show one time, you could just be backstage. And so we were on the road for 6 weeks.
You guys were on the road for 6 full weeks for that.
Yeah. One of the weeks was a dark week too. So we aside from they called it off when we got to Guatemala City. Calvert would fluctuate between being miserable and being happy, and by that time I think we were calling it off. We had run out of vehicles. The RV we left in, we had to leave at Laredo, Texas, at the border, because we weren't insured to take it into Mexico. So we rented a 16-passenger van in Laredo, and whoever that was we rented it from wouldn't let us take it further than Monterrey, which was about 60 miles south of the border. And then we rented a Ford Taurus, and we could only take that to the Guatemala border because we weren't insured to take it into Guatemala. And then we took it's called a chicken bus. They're basically school buses.
Okay, so it's a converted school bus. It's like you see in the movies.
Yeah, exactly that. And there were chickens in cages on the bus, just being transported. And it was a 5-hour bus ride because they stopped in every small town from the border to Guatemala City. And at that point, what am I going to rent in Guatemala City to keep going down to Tierra del Fuego? So they called it off, and they flew Calvert home, and me and the driver, who was a friend of mine, who was a mechanic that they brought on just in case there was car trouble.
Sure.
We collected all the vehicles and made it. It took us 6 weeks to get to Guatemala City, and we made it back in 18 hours because we dropped the rental car off at an airport in South Mexico. We flew to Monterrey to pick up the van, drove the van, got the RV, and we alternated every 2 hours, sleeping and driving to get back. It was that was an adventure, just getting everything collected and returned. But
I'm blown away by this. So that entire trip, that entire bit that went on and on and on, and always had little remotes and updates and all that. 3 of you total, and it was over 6 weeks.
It was 4 of us. Calvert had a friend, Frank.
Okay.
Traveling with him, and but Frank left. I think when we got to New Orleans, he had a family thing he had to deal with. So then it was just the 3 of us into the last couple of weeks.
Okay. So a lot of downtime. I mean, you got times where, okay, yeah, you're recording, you're doing these things. The downtime must have been, was it boring? Did you guys get to know each other like completely? Like you knew each other's secrets by the end of this? Did you hate each other by the end of it? What a crazy
there was some tension between Calvert and I.
Yeah.
That started on the first trip. We were the first call in, we were in Lexington, and we butted heads a little bit because it was a college campus.
Yeah.
Everybody recognized him, and he was giving away all the T-shirts, and we only had a limited supply of late night T-shirts.
Right.
And I said, no more. And he got mad at me, and he called his agent, and his agent called Morty, and Morty called me, and he said, you got to treat Calvert like a star. And it's like, but I need the T-shirts. I don't know how long I'm going to be on the road.
Yeah.
So, and it was something silly like that. But I accommodated him. I tried to. I don't think I was ever mean. I think we were both a little frustrated because the traveling wasn't hard, but it was mapping everything out. Where do we get to next?
No GPS back then.
No, we had all the maps. And we did have one of the original mobile phones in a attaché case that was
like a
this
bag
big
phone. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a big brick. I don't have. It was quiet, and Calvert, kept to himself. He enjoyed the scenery while we were driving.
Yeah,
and we did. The week that they were down, we were in Huatulco, which is on I guess that's the Pacific Ocean. It's a beach community, and we stayed at a hotel. It was a Sheraton that hadn't really opened yet, so
yeah.
The accommodations weren't spectacular, and we were at the beach and we looked across the cove and it was like, what's that place over there? And it was a Club Med. So we drove over to Club Med, and I had the Amex card from the show and said, can we stay here for 3 days? And so we had fun at Club Med for 3 days. Calvert enjoyed that. Yeah, he had a fun there. But he took a spill and broke his glasses. And I was like, at that point, I sort of was like, I'm responsible for this human being. I gotta probably be taking better care of him. But I kept him alive for 6 weeks.
The fact that when I first came on, people didn't get VCRs till 85, 86, and that sort of thing. And I was constantly astonished that everyone saw these things.
Yes.
I'll share one. Let's see. Did something where somebody wrote a bit where they compared the top of Dave's head, said it looked like he had a hamster up there. And Paul Schaefer had laughed and said, I called him hamster head. Okay, like that weekend we go out for the Emmys, and we happened to win that year. And we're making the rounds of the press. It's all very exciting. And people out across the street on the other side of the sawhorses, Letterman walks by and someone calls out, hamster head. And those sort of things. Jerry Mulligan and I talked at colleges for a while and did a little lecture circuit, a dozen colleges, and you bring up anything. People would ask, say like, well, there's the time Crispin Glover came on the show.
Of course.
Do the karate kick at Dave's head, and just the whole audience, there'd be that, oh yeah,
Yep.
Saw it. And it's all very flattering, but it's also like, that was on at 1:15 in the morning.
Yeah.
What were you all doing? Don't you people have jobs? Well, not college students, but I'm just amazed how many people saw this stuff. Yeah, we did just one more along those lines. We did a top 10, I think it was top 10 home run calls, new home run calls, and number.
That's a great premise.
Touch them all and stuff like that. It was before the World Series. And the number one was, the only one was Elvis Has Left the Building.
There you go. Perfect.
It was the 1987 World Series, and Kent Herbeck hits a grand slam in that World Series, and they're panning the crowd, and someone holds up, and someone is holding up a sign saying, Elvis has left the building. And you just, you can't believe the stuff got out there and had that much impact. And well, my goodness, multiply that by 10 with The Simpsons.
Did you know it was time to stop being a writer and to move into other elements of broadcasting, or was the pressure there where you needed to get out?
There wasn't a pressure to get out.
Okay.
Dave really, really appreciated people who were still there.
Yeah.
And what there was about the 6th or 7th year, right? We went to LA.
Yeah.
And we did a week of shows in LA.
Yeah.
And we had no idea up until then how popular the show was. Again,
that gopher thing. Yeah.
And suddenly we're driving into the parking lot at NBC and we're using Johnny Carson's studios, and it's 8:30 in the morning and there's lines down the block to get into our show. And people were like, what?
To get into your show, not Johnny's show, your show.
So there was that.
Yep.
There was then agents start to circle and start to tell you about the opportunities that are out there.
Yes.
And they were good opportunities.
Absolutely.
And that coincided, I think, with there's just a day you show up and you drop, you keep using the gopher metaphor. I used to use the metaphor just like the bucket in the well. And you drop the bucket in and it just went clunk. And you realized, it really, you're there for it. And this happens over days. The agent thing happened over years, where suddenly people are like, oh, wait, I think the first migration was The Simpsons, right?
Yeah.
And I know my friend Kevin, right? He was like, I'm going to go work on this. Actually, he went to work on Married with Children, but it was that Fox explosion. But I've talked to Jeff Martin and I'm like, really, Jeff, it's a cartoon. How long is that going to last? There was all that stuff kind of came together. And then for me, I met Norman Lear through his daughter, Kate. And he was thinking, oh, I want to go back into television. He had a couple of ideas literally for late night television and offered me a deal, like come to LA, spend a couple of years with me.
Yeah.
It's like, fucking Norman Lear.
Being at the level that you were, did you know that you were on the cusp of something and part of something that was changing things?
I didn't realize it was, yes, I did. But, then again, I know Dave always gives credit. I always give credit. Lorne Michaels made it all possible for us. Yeah. Not directly. I mean, he was a fan and we all obviously knew him and liked him. But, he paved the groundwork for that type of television. He really did. And he gave us license to do, his show, and what he created gave us license to do what we did. He was the first to hire the Harvard guys. Yeah. And we just latched onto that and brought Merrill brought all the Harvard guys in. Yeah. And it was a great move. They were fantastic.
When I was very young at like a Writers Guild East function in New York, I think we crossed paths and I was like this skinny 23-year-old guy or something. And I was like, it's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. I was
yeah.
Like, out on him. I mean, the cool thing was I always loved and never ceased being starstruck by these writers like Jerry Mulligan and Steve Young that straddled both shows.
Yes.
So when 22-year-old Craig Thomas shows up to Late Show with David Letterman, as having been a super fan of the old late night show, like Steve Young, there was this top 10 list that I will just quote the wording of this one top 10 joke because I discovered at some point when I was at Late Show that Steve Young had written it. Remember all the old top 10 books that are behind you as we speak? I'm looking at your mantle. I'm looking literally at, okay, wait, this was the other one I was paging through.
Ah, there we go.
We had a match. I was getting in the mood to talk to you by looking at these books.
Yeah.
I remember just funny how some of these little bits of wording, again, these messages in a bottle that find people, it's not even the greatest top 10 list of all time, but it was like from the 80s, top 10 Mrs. Paul pet peeves. Mrs. Paul, the frozen fish stick company. Top 10 Mrs. Paul pet peeves. Some random, Tuesday night in 1989 this airs or whatever. God knows when. And it was just a bunch of like pet peeves that would be true of someone manufacturing frozen fish sticks. And one of them was this line that somehow I discovered that Steve Young wrote that was the flat accusing stare of a dying cod. And it kind of, pardon me, getting over a little cold here.
Accusing.
The flat accusing stare of a dying cod. That's poetry.
Yep.
That is poetry. That's Emily Dickinson could have written that top 10 item. It conjures up this incredibly evocative image of Mrs. Paul watching a fish die that she's going to chop up and turn into fish sticks. And it's watching her with this flat accusing stare, judging her as it dies. And that's one of Mrs. Paul's pet peeves, apparently. Yep. And I don't know how I probably just quoted that as like, because I always wanted the top 10 lists to be more like that. More timeless. Like, forget about the topical. Like, that was, if I had a pet peeve about Late Show, it's like, I wish more of the top 10 list could have dabbled in those colors. You know, that artistic palette. Some of them still did on Late Show. Sometimes you would do an abstract list or sneak in a weird joke like that. But they were a little more topical, right? It was the 11:30 show now. You were serving up the news of the day a little bit. I always loved that, when you could just write something as poetic as that. So yeah, that's just to say, like, every now and again, while working with some of these guys, you'd quote the flat accusing stare of a dying cod, and Steve Young would go, "I wrote that." Jesus Christ, you know what that meant? I remember that. I could quote you that verbatim from 10 years ago, 15, whatever. And so yeah, it was nice to work with a couple of those guys and get to like send them those appreciations, because again, back in the day, they weren't getting to hear from fans as much. They weren't getting to hear people quote their joke.
They're in a vacuum. Yep.
Some of that, and you meet people along the way, and you start realizing, oh, people like the show, but it was different. It was harder to get the sense of like fandoms, right? Like, this is why like Comic-Con became a thing. This is why this is why fandoms on the internet. And now people can have more of a sense of people responding to it. That's good and bad, because you also get plenty of hate and tell you, this was terrible. This used to be better, blah, blah. But there's the upside of realizing like some of these weird things you craft and you pour yourself into in some weird way. I mean, that's what I love. The artistry put into something as dumb as that Mrs. Paul's pet peeves joke. The level of artistry put into something that incredibly stupid.
Yes.
That's the dream for me. So yeah, getting to overlap with some of those guys and getting to work with Chris Elliott. I mean, I always remain a little starstruck by the people that I was watching when I was a teenager.
Safe to say, as you were getting your start, as you were brought into the fold, Steve O'Donnell was an immeasurable force to do with that.
Yeah, he was the head writer who hired me in 1990. I had known of him before that. I think when I was about to get out of college in 1987, I actually called the show, and how I even got a phone number, I don't know. I must have had some transient whiff of ambition briefly in my life. And then I got him on the phone in a weekday afternoon, which is nonsensical right there, because it was like being on the high speed treadmill of, oh my God, we have to tape the show in an hour. And somehow he got on the phone and had an amiable conversation with me. And I think I referenced that in the remarks I make.
You did.
Introducing him at the Writers Guild Awards. But yes, beloved and respected, but many people are respected without being beloved. Steve was both, because he was a real nice person who just related to people and wanted to meet them and find out about them. And if he saw a glimmer of something that entertained him, he was happy to try to help it find its home. And that with me and many other writers of that era, he saw something that he thought could be cultivated, and we were often given a little while to find our sea legs at the show. Later on, it was much more, if you're not getting good stuff on the air in the first 6 weeks or something, we're going to move you on out and try somebody else. I was allowed to find my way, and it, to my mind, and generously, it took many years. I don't think I was really, really good at that job until quite late in my tenure there. And even then, that's like a major league batting average is like, oh, you're hitting over 300. That's good. I mean, if you pitched 10 ideas and 3 of them were pretty good and worth trying, that would be a good average there as well. So anyway, Steve O'Donnell, I've told this story elsewhere. I don't know who's heard it, but my very first day at the Letterman show, April 30th, 1990, he met me at some elevator bank in 30 Rock, and I'm looking around. Oh my God, I'm in the big leagues. It's so exciting. And brought me upstairs and said, we got to find you an office. And on the 14th floor of the certain part of NBC, there were numerous empty offices. Several writers had skedaddled for the West Coast after the 8th anniversary show that winter.
Okay.
The show had been in LA, and people had been having meetings and suddenly had new jobs offered to them. And there's a big turnover on the staff. So I was part of the new generation coming in that involved Paul Sims, Spike Ferriston.
Wow.
Steve O'Donnell said, "Let's get you in office. How about this one?" And I said, sure. And I don't think, did we even have computers yet? Maybe we did. They had just started getting computers instead of typewriters. But what was unusual about this office was there were boxes of record albums on the floor. And I said, "Oh, what's all this with the records?" He said, "Well, the previous writer in this office was in charge of a bit called Dave's Record Collection, and with these weird record albums. Hey, maybe you could be the new Dave's Record Collection guy." And I said, "Sure, I guess. Okay." And
Good place to start. Okay, so he's giving you something on your first day.
Right. He thought that I might have a good sensibility for that. But really, within the first 20 minutes of me arriving at 30 Rock, the first domino had been hit in a long chain, which would result in books, documentaries, lectures, public appearances, this whole twisted miniature empire which grew out of that.
Dave Rygalski,
Yes.
he was talking at one point about, well, the guys I'd been there with had all left. Chris Elliott and Adam Resnick had left to do Get a Life, and Matt Wickline, Sandy Frank were doing In Living Color, and Kevin Kern had left to do Married with Children. And and I'm waiting to hear my name. And he goes, "Who else was there?" And I'm waiting, still waiting. So
still waiting.
Yeah, we like to think we're memorable, but I guess not. And just talking about I just listened to Steve Young's this morning. And I've met him in passing once or twice, and certainly he has a great reputation. And I knew Steve O'Donnell, who I keep in touch with and have lunch with often. I knew he thought very highly of him, but I felt like that was the first extended visit I'd had with Steve. And he said, when he first came into Letterman, which is 2 months after I left, Steve said, "Well, let's get you in office." And he said, "Here's one." And there was a box of records, a couple of boxes of records there. And oh, well, the guy who was here before did Dave's Record Collection. Maybe you do it now. And I'm going, that was me. That was my office.
Steve O'Donnell recognized that I had some core sensibility that was a good match for the show.
Okay.
So he said, I'm going to put some chips down on this guy. I think things should work out. If he immerses himself in the show more, he'll be very good and reliable. I had watched the show actually very little, and I may be an extreme example of what I think is true of some of the earlier generation Letterman creative people. They were not necessarily enamored of television and did not absorb it like a sponge and worship it. I had seen the show, I don't know, probably a handful of times. The first time I ever saw it, I was flabbergasted. It was early 1983, and I was up late with some friends. I saw this show I'd never seen before, never heard of before, and I ended up on the floor, curled up in a fetal position, laughing so hard I could barely breathe. And yet I did not, from that moment, say, this is my life's destiny. I must find these people and work with them. No concept of that. I didn't know TV shows had staffs, really. Yes, there's names going by at the end, but I didn't mentally commit to that. And I also didn't even think I've got to find a way to stay up late every night now and watch it. I don't, years went by in the mid 80s in high school and college where I really ignored the show completely. And so it sort of doesn't make sense that I ended up there, but it also makes complete sense because the early people like Steve O'Donnell and Dave himself, I think, had an interest but a skepticism for television. They were not hypnotized by the glamour and everything. They just thought, well, this is this strange part of our lives which we will acknowledge, and we will also satirize and keep at an arm's length sort of emotionally. And so I came into the Letterman show not knowing a lot. I think when I started, I better cram, and I watched it every night for 2 weeks before I started. So I kind of, here I go, I can do this. But there was so much that I didn't know that I didn't know. Like maybe the average viewer wouldn't even know this either, but meetings, people would talk about, oh, should we have Calvert do this? What if
Yeah.
Calvert does that? And I finally said, excuse me, who is Calvert? Come on, you don't know. Everybody knows. Well, it's Larry Bud Melman. That's what people on the other side of the TV know him as. I don't know how many people knew him as Calvert. So I actually didn't feel too bad.
Yeah.
There was no internet message board where people were talking about behind the scenes of all this. But you'd have a good idea, and someone said, "Oh, we did that in February of '89," or and a fair amount of instances like that where somebody would have a good joke. The craziest version of that I ever had, which also was encouraging in a way, it was the new books segment at NBC.
Yep.
And just like make up fake books that the props department would put together. And I proposed one. It was the New York City white pages arranged by height rather than alphabetical order.
Okay.
And I handed that in on my page of however many. And Steve O'Donnell called me down to his office and said, I see you had this. And I said, yeah. And he went over to a file cabinet and rummaged, and he found one of the other writers, like 3 years earlier, had written the same joke, and it had not gotten on. So there was no way I was drafting off of somebody else's idea. It's just that I bizarrely arrived at exactly the same conceptual bit of nonsense. And even then, I don't think it got on, but it told me, and probably Steve O'Donnell, yes, this is the right sort of person here for this place.
But so what happened was that I didn't get a job offer, and there were no job openings there at all.
Yep.
And the one opening that happened was a talent researcher job. That was not an entry-level job. Most of the entry-level jobs were sort of answering telephones and so forth. And I'd been removed from phones. I wasn't allowed to answer the phones as an intern. And so I had made a joke, I guess. Do you know Schukei, Richard Checkman, who's a friend of mine now?
Very well.
So anyway, he had a phone call one day, and they asked if he was in, and I said, I'll check. And he didn't like that. And so I was sort of like removed from phones.
Oh,
like,
no.
I think he complained. I love Schukei now, and we're great friends. But at the time, like, there was like, people did not like interns to begin with. And as I said, a lot of people acted like they belonged there.
Right.
And I tried not to do that, but I sort of had that moment of weakness. And anyway, I was removed. So the research position was coveted. It was,
Yes.
Everyone sort of saw that it was an entry level to producing, and it was a big deal. And there were, I think, Morty told me later, like over 100 submissions to be a researcher.
Wow.
And so that Friday, and this is before the internet and everything, they told you who we were going to have to do a profile on, and we all had to do profiles over the weekend and get them in. And the profile that they gave us was Sammy Davis Jr. So I like beeline to the New York Public Library, gone out his 3 autobiographies,
Yep.
which are, I don't even know, yes I can, they're all like 800 pages. It was
Sure.
ridiculous. And
Yeah.
so got them all, went home, and just started devouring them. In the course of reading those, he mentioned being the best man at Linda Lovelace's wedding, who was, you know, the big porn actress at the time.
Yep.
And so I remembered hearing that she had her own autobiography, and I was like, I wonder whether Sammy's in this. And I went to, like, in the West Village where I live, there was sort of a Wiccan witchcraft gay woman's store.
Yep.
And I went in and got her autobiography was there. And I read it, and the stuff in it was really disturbing about Sammy Davis Jr. and Hugh Hefner and all these other people. And so I was like, well, how do I present this in here? So that, because Letterman, you know, he likes the humor to be above the belt.
Sure.
So I sort of said, well, I'm putting this in as background. This is stuff I discovered in research, and I did it sort of as delicately as I could. And I kind of had a feeling that I would be the only one who had that information.
Yeah.
And I knew Morty would also like it probably. So at the end of the process, Morty told me, he's like, of all the submissions, yours was the best. But there's a guy at the Today Show who's been trying to get this job for 5 years, and I'm, we feel like we should give it to him.
Yep.
And I was, devastated by that, and sort of went home and this has sort of been something I've tried to do my entire career, which is sort of advocate for myself, I guess, a little bit.
Sure, absolutely.
And I wrote a letter. I wrote a letter to Morty, and I sort of said to him, I go, which would you rather have? An old, tired researcher who's been doing it for years and never got ahead, or somebody who's young and hungry who's going to, bust his ass for you,
Yep.
and I'll kill myself for this job, and anything I can do, I really want this job, right? And it was a Hail Mary.
Yep.
And Morty called me, because my internship ended and I went back to bartending. So Morty called me, 1:30 in the afternoon, and I'd been bartending that night till 5 o'clock in the morning. New York bars stay open till 4.
Mm-hmm.
And he woke me up at 1:30 in the afternoon. And he's like, am I waking you up? And I go, yeah, you are. Who is this, kind of thing? And he's like, well, I was going to offer you a job, but now I don't think I want to. And I was like, no, please, I want the job. And he's like, why are you still asleep? I was like, oh, I'm still bartending. And so he offered me the job. And I got the job because of my Lord Sammy Davis Jr. profile.
This was the days before the internet.
Yeah.
It was also the day, this is something you would take for granted now because everything's on YouTube. But back then, there was no YouTube. And like one of the charming things on like our show was it was a place to occasionally see during a guest interview, like someone's like first appearance on TV.
Sure.
Like, such and such, so-and-so before they were famous, maybe they were on The Dating Game or something like that.
Sure.
And so one of the jobs of the researcher was to try to dig up all that old footage, which back then was really hard because all this footage was just kept in warehouses of various production companies. And so you would have to like see like, okay, 20th Century Fox owns The Dating Game, and you would have to find the air date and then call somebody and then just like try to convince them to go to the warehouse and get the clip out, cut the clip and send it to you. And it was like a very arduous process. And it was a lot of legwork, like trying to track down that kind of stuff. And now it's just, it's all on YouTube. And also it was research because there was no internet. You were just kind of like, you weren't just researching the guests. You were also just sort of like the librarian for everyone at the show. Just everyone at the show who had questions that today they could answer on the internet. They would just call you with just random, stuff. And like I remember once Dave was thinking about getting a place in Montana, which he's been very, very happily, and and I remember his assistant called me, and because I was in research, I was the guy to ask. She asked, like, will bears be a problem in this part of Montana? And I was like, geez, I don't know. And so I was like, what am I supposed to do? And so like, she named the town, and I called the hardware store in the town. And like, as I'm talking to them, I'm knowing what the answer is going to be. I said like, hey, I'm thinking of buying a place in Montana. I'm just worried, are bears a thing, And as I'm saying it, I know that I come across like this jerk, New York jerk. And like, sure. And sure enough, the guy in the hardware store is like, hey, Harvey, this is a guy for, and they're all laughing at me and like, oh, you scared of bears and everything. And so then I get off the phone and I call Dave's assistant, and he's fine, buy the house. There's no bears. Dave buys the house. And then, I don't know, a few months later, he's in the house. He walks into his kitchen and there's a freaking bear in his kitchen.
Exactly. Little did he know.
And so I felt kind of bad about that. Oh, well, I guess I wasn't very good at research, I think is what we're all getting at.
I got promoted. So let's see. I was a researcher, and I used to provide all this sort of segment material to the producers, and that was mostly Frank Gannon. And then I was also booking. I started booking some of the human interest guests, and then some of the athletes. And then I booked a human interest guest, and it was a big coup. And from that, and I wrote an intro. The intros are such an important part for Dave. I wrote an intro that ended up being, I think, the front page of New York Newsday the next day.
Holy smokes.
And they let me start producing some segments from there. So
wow.
So what happened was there was a kid, and again, it's such a cool story, I think, is that remember when, and I don't know what year this was, 91 maybe, or 90 or 89, something. Dan Quayle was the vice president.
Yep.
Or maybe they were running for 1990, maybe it was 89, something like that.
Okay.
And he went to this chalkboard and wrote the word potato.
Yes.
This kid, William Figueroa, did, and he wrote it correctly. It's a kid, you know. And then Dan Quayle said no, and walked up and wrote an E at the end of potato, and it was a national scandal. Now this kid, William Figueroa, he ended up. Everybody wanted to book him. You know, that was sort of the big booking, the big coup, and the Today Show. We were going to get the Today Show and Good Morning America, and I had, I used a tack that I didn't invent, but it was sort of like I'd heard legends of before, which is we delivered a pizza to his house, and in the pizza I put a note saying, hey, I'm a nice guy. If you want to talk about this, we'd love to have you on, kind of thing. And he agreed to do it. And because I got him as the booking, they let me write the segment. And so I wrote the segment for William Figueroa. And I wrote, yesterday, what did I write? So yesterday, our next guest walked up to the chalkboard. The events that followed terrified an entire nation. And so the cover of the Newsday was Terrifying a Nation. It was a picture of Quayle and the kid from, the potato thing. But from that, and that went really well, they ended up letting me produce more and more segments. And that's how I got my foot in the door as a producer there, It was so unnatural that I was there. It was so not part of the plan. And I wasn't a Harvard guy. And I got into NYU, into the general studies program, which was sort of the remedial part of NYU, because my high school counselor knew somebody who worked there pretty much. I got turned down from every college I applied to. And honestly, that I could prosper at a place like that was beyond comprehension. So that I took every opportunity I had to heart, and did everything I could to succeed. But I also ended up being sort of being the Peter principle. My calling was interviewing people and helping them come and tell stories in sort of an organic way that were funny and made them look good and made our hosts look good. And that was really, I found that was a skill set I had. So and part of it, I think part of it really was born from the fact that I've never been uncomfortable talking to anybody, be it presidents or Pavarotti or anybody. I've never been nervous about it. It's just not in my thing. And Letterman was amongst those. And I think a lot of people were really nervous talking to Dave, and working with Dave, and anxious about whether he liked something or not, which we all wanted his approval. But I don't think that I ever felt uncomfortable. And I think that I think the reason why I was able to prosper there with him is that I, to some extent, is that it was easy to talk. I never asked anything of the guy. That was one thing, and I just was happy. I was so happy to be there. So, and I think I also made the things that I worked on, went well, and he trusted me, and so that was sort of how that worked also, I think.
I decided to get serious about guitar lessons around 2004 and started picking up some finger picking chops and thought, I love this. I seem to have an affinity for this. And so I had several years of lessons. So I was getting pretty good, and I was composing instrumental pieces, but I, for a long time, felt like there's that realm of creativity, and then there's the world of words and ideas. That's the day job. And I very cautiously thought, what would happen if I made a Venn diagram that overlapped these two circles? And I think the earliest was it was close to the Thanksgiving song, somewhere around 2013 or so. There had been a couple odd outliers very early back in the 90s. You may recall the piece we did on NBC and CBS, The Strong Guy, the Fat Guy, the Genius.
Absolutely. You composed that?
The theme song I worked up with Rob Burnett, and then we sort of gave a demo to Paul Schaefer and the band, and they, as they always did, just took your little nervous sounding sweaty scraps of whatever and turned it into a magnificent slugfest of music. So that was
it was kind of like a Western, sort of a kind of a,
yeah, it had a rawhide feel to it. Yeah.
Yes, rawhide. That's exactly the word. Yes.
Yeah, I think all these guys and Felicia ladies had such a wide range of references. Like you could just throw out something like they were working it up in rehearsal, and Paul said to Will, try more like a rawhide bass. So suddenly, oh, and did you enjoy my Paul Schaefer impression? Oh, I've got
Bruce Springsteen showing up. You know, Project X, I think it was called, or you know, you guys kept it under wraps pretty good. The rehearsal footage is out there as well. I love that. So do you rehearsed that one night and then it was the night of the show and that was it? Like that's the
I'm trying to remember what that is.
Oh, I'm sorry. The very last night of late night.
I was in Japan.
You were in Japan? You weren't there that night?
Okay, let me tell you my whole story about that. Yeah, there was a sub for me that night. Francisco Centeno is the bass player's name that did that night. But the thing that happened was, you know, I always got these calls to come do other things, and I turned most everything down. But this was a really cool Japan, like a week or two in Japan. And Schaefer, as I said before, was one of those rare guys who knew that you had to go out and do this other stuff to come back in and be fully you know, and for his band, right? So I needed to go out and do that Japan
recharge
thing.
The batteries, recharge the batteries.
Yeah, he knew how important that was to me, but I also knew that this was during the last Letterman show. And the way Dave was getting kicked off the network to me was really not cool. And so for that reason, and also for the reason that I actually checked in with Dave to say, hey, Dave, listen, I got this offer to do this and I know it's the last show. You know, what do you think? And he said, well, I'm not going to really make a big deal out of it anyway, because he was also pretty sour about the whole thing.
Right.
But of course, when the time came to do the last show, he was going to go out with more of a splash than he had told me that he was going to. So I missed out on a pretty great night that night. I not knowing that I was going to be missing out on that. But I found out later, oh man, they got Springsteen for the last show. Had I known.
Okay, yeah, there's a little bit of you know, Monday morning quarterbacking there. Had you known, would you have changed your, like, you know, charging up the batteries are important. I'm sure you were doing something awesome. Had you known, would you have altered things to be part of that?
Well, it wouldn't have been because it was Bruce Springsteen or any other particular person. It would have been because Dave had more of a I don't want to say emotional attachment to that moment, but he was going to do it with more panache than I had thought. If I had known that, you know, that would have put way more importance on it. So
yeah,
you know, I would have opted probably just to hang around and do it.
And I think you're sort of getting to what I think is almost like the essence of the show, which, you know, not that there was a mission statement, but I think were there to be one when Dave started, was taking the artifice out of show business. And, you know, our skits aren't going to be performed by these, you know, like, you know, these fake actors. It's going to be the guy who's the stagehand and, you know, showing humans the way they really are. And so, yeah, that was the philosophy of the show. It's just kind of like just capturing regular thing or people behaving normally.
You're always looking for a moment that breaks through the canned nature of broadcasting. Could this, and now you go back to actually Meryl. So Meryl and I bonded on who's William Wegman? William Wegman with the famous dog pictures. Very early on in the 70s, experimented with video. And some of his video experiments, I saw them at the Museum of at the Art Institute in Chicago at a display. And there are things like, you have to realize it's like, so this is very early video, like home video. So it's black and white, it's grainy. Here's the camera, and the camera is tight on, like all you're seeing is this. It's William Wegman's naked torso. And he's got a can of deodorant, and he's spraying the deodorant onto his armpit and talking about how much he likes this deodorant until the can runs out. So the stuff is running down his torso and falling up, and it's looking disgusting. And he's just talking in this, this is so great. It gives me, and it uses all the cliches, 24-hour coverage, right? So he had that, and then he did a really interesting thing with one of his dogs. He put a dog biscuit in a glass jar, and the audience, again, people like in a museum just watching on little benches, horrified. Oh my God, because the dog's going to break the jar. The dog's going to, and it was that, right? And she and I talked a lot about that, about just how hard it was to create something on television that didn't feel like it was prepared. That something real could happen.